them how to go viral?
Yeah, that is the thing I definitely try not to do or make any promises about. Yes. Because I think that's a slippery slope. This is not about teaching you how to be internet famous or even how to teach you how to be an influencer.
Yeah.
I see some very interesting things happening on campus. There's always been, or for a long time, have been campus street teams, right? Where brands saw some benefit to promote an upcoming music release.
Right.
And especially a campus like Penn State with more than 40,000 students, that's very attractive for a brand.
Would you also like to make a bold prediction about influencer marketing or creators?
I'll make the very self-serving prediction that we'll see more colleges and universities teach the creator economy. I think that's a pretty safe bet.
And speaking of these content creators, what are the top skills a student needs?
I like that. Thinking about thriving in ethics, students need to really think about, because your judgment can be clouded when money's involved. It's like, wait, you're going to give me all this free stuff and pay me to just make a post about it?
Hi everyone, this is Shubham Tiwari. I'm the Associate Director of Content Marketing and Socials at Phyllo, the universal solution for social media background checks and influencer vetting. I welcome you all to Impulse Season 3. We rank number 1 on Google for influencer marketing podcast. To maintain the high standards, we have a special guest today, Bill Zimmerman, who's the assistant teaching professor in the Donald P. Belisario College of Communications at Penn State. Prior to teaching, he worked as a newspaper reporter and public relations professional. He holds accreditations in public relations. Also, Professor Zimmerman has published a textbook called Understanding the Creator Economy, Making Digital Media Work for You, in collaboration with Kendall Hunt. He's currently creating a content creator certification program that will be offered by his college. And he's also the co-director of a 1-week content summer camp for high schoolers. So a lot going on there in the introduction. So please, let's welcome Professor Zimmerman.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here. There's so much creativity and energy around the creator economy, and it's fun talking to people who get just as excited about it as I do.
Yeah, and as I said, there's a lot to unpack from your introduction. But let's start with a fun question. If you were a teenager right now, what kind of content would you be creating right now?
Yeah, I'm 44, and there's definitely a big part of me that wishes I had come along a little later to be able to jump in and play with some of these tools. I definitely was a kid who was drawn to creativity and getting really deep into things. If I was going back to my teenage years, I maybe would have been doing reviews of hip hop CDs or something like that, offering my 2 cents there. I could have maybe offering my analysis of the world of professional wrestling. When I was growing up, there was a big war between the two main companies, WCW and WWF, and I think I would have loved to have jumped on that and offered my 2 cents. And that is very fertile ground still for content creators, especially on YouTube and in podcasts. So I think that those would have been the spaces I gravitated to. Not saying they would have been any good, but I think I would have had a lot of fun.
Can we call these, wrestlers from our childhood the first influencers, because they influenced us the most?
Yes, they sold a lot of T-shirts, sold a lot of action figures, right? And there were parts of us that really believed in them, right, and became invested in them. And even though we knew that it wasn't exactly 100% sport, we could still set aside, suspend our disbelief and enjoy it, right?
I was heartbroken when I got to know that it's not real. So this moment of silence.
I think that's when a lot of us lost our innocence in the 80s when our parents broke that to us. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm glad that you said, they moved a lot of merch, because it's a differentiator in the creator economy as well. Can a creator move merch? That's the real influence, right? So I'll just, ask you to unpack, your summer camp, for high schoolers. So when we hear, the terms summer camps, we think of, a lot of physical activities, hikes, team building exercises. Sure. What does it have to become, creators, or how do they get inspired to create content?
Yeah, at our university, we certainly have a wide variety of camps for kids. There's sports camps, there's science camps. So all of those bases are covered. But the College of Communications for years has recognized that there's a demand for students to take these sorts of camps. The originators were a film camp, film production camp, and then a broadcast journalism camp. And then we added a content creator camp a few years ago. Now, these camps are run by our admissions office. So they do see it as there's an outreach function here that hopefully these students are, from around the country come to campus and think Penn State's pretty cool and a place that they could see themselves in a few years. So there's that part of it. And something that often happens in these camps too is we find that some of these students, these high school kids who come to campus, some of them for the first time are starting to feel like they're finding their people. They may not have anybody who aspires to be a broadcast journalist or somebody who's really wants to make their own content, wants to move on from just watching it all day to actually making it. So we, as faculty, we're excited, when we can see these students really get energized and feel like they're around, like-minded young people. So we try to, just do a lot of exercises. The camp coincides with some things that are happening on the edge of campus in the community. So there's chances we can have the students out, documenting that, recording, talking to people, making short form video. So, and we try to introduce them to lots of different areas at the university, get them to the art museum and learn, some photo tricks there. So we're always, it's a work in progress. I think the first few times I maybe tried to lecture too much during this. And then sometimes when you give them too many activities, you have to pull back because you're just tiring them out way too much. So we're still trying to figure out what the secret sauce is for what that programming's like. But the gist of it is trying to teach them how they can be digital storytellers for themselves, or maybe one day, working for a brand, working as PR people or marketers or advertisers.
Right. How did you get started into this? Because when we, think of creator economy, we don't think of, let's say it can be, taught in schools, or there is a program which can turn you into a creator. So how did you get started? Give us a backdrop of this course as well that you're running there.
So yeah, I was, I think, always drawn to this even before it maybe had a title, and that was being a newspaper reporter for like the first decade of professional life. I was attracted to the creativity of it. I liked that I could, gather information, write, and put it out into the world and have it critiqued, and hopefully people liked it or benefited from it. And I got some of that back in return. I like that, in journalism, there are annual awards, and not to say that's the only reason to do it, but I thought, boy, this is a really cool part of this job that a lot of people don't get to do, to round up your best work and submit it and maybe get an honorable mention or occasionally, win in a category for your newspaper size. So I liked, creating in that sense. And definitely in those days of journalism, content was a bad word. It was seen as kind of minimizing, journalistic work. And I think there were some valid criticisms to referring to it as in that format. But it seems that term has prevailed and has just become such a catch-all for any sort of content that's being put out there, whether it's from an individual or a news outlet or a brand. But yeah, so I found I was energized by being creative, writing, putting my own stamp on something and releasing it out into the world. And then I eventually made my way, like a lot of journalists or reporters do. You kind of get fed up with low pay and diminishing advancement prospects. You go into PR, and that's what I did. And I came to Penn State University to work in their PR office. And then in later years, that included being a social media manager, which was a role I didn't really expect to find myself in, but I think why I got kind of pushed towards that area was showing just some skill when it came to photography and documenting things happening on campus. And I think I also showed some good news judgment, I was doing my first work was an editor for the Penn State News website. So I had a good sense of flagging articles from there that would play well on Facebook. And during that time also, in our office. So I worked for the university's Office of Strategic Communications, the main PR arm of the entire university. And we dabbled with a YouTube series called This is Penn State that I was lucky enough to have my supervisor assign me to. And this was 2015, 2016. I look back at the numbers. We did 14 episodes, and to my surprise, even one of them reached as many as it had 21,000 views. That was the best one. But it was an attempt at multimedia storytelling at Penn State that, we were doing all those things that universities do, writing profiles on faculty, documenting research breakthroughs. But we thought, what are the different ways that we need to be telling a story? And what we landed on was kind of our version of the old Discovery Channel show Dirty Jobs with Mike Rowe, where he was, the host and putting himself in these new situations, shining a light on all the people that kind of make our world tick. And we did the similar thing at Penn State, telling the stories of the people who make Penn State, Penn State. So I was going to our creamery where we make our famous ice cream, doing a profile on the lumberjack team at Penn State that competes in different, wood chopping competitions, and shining a spotlight on the drum major of our beloved blue band. So I really enjoyed that as well. So that also, I was, content creator light, I guess, in that case. And then when I became a full-time faculty member, I started producing a podcast on entrepreneurship that was really, because I was going to become a full-time faculty member, I still wanted to be creating, making stuff, working, getting my feet wet in some sort of communications capacity. So I did this podcast. It was very regional. It was focused on stories of entrepreneurs and side hustlers, mainly in my area, but some beyond. And I did that for 4 years, got about 100 episodes out. It did. The growth was pretty, it flatlined, for a long time, but I learned a lot from it. I think I grew as a presenter or interviewer. I got to talk to a lot of cool people and build up my network. And it gave me a little bit of a differentiator in my college. So I'm a teaching faculty member. I don't have a PhD. I don't do research. And we have to look for other options to kind of differentiate ourselves, show our worth to our college. And that seemed like an option for me. So, and then just, so always having an affinity for this stuff, tracking it in different ways, starting to include more and more lessons from the world of creators and influencers in my digital PR course. I started to kind of see that I think an avenue for me is trying to create some standardization around teaching the world of creators and influencers. And, the textbook companies have agents, have salespeople who are regularly, touching base with faculty across the country, and sometimes over Zoom or sometimes in person. And I got, a pretty standard email from Kendall Hunt Publishing and pitched them an idea. And before I knew it, I had deadlines to meet and and papers to sign. And I was like, oh, wow, this is really happening. I'd never done anything like this before. But it's so far, the response I'm getting, from people like you, these, from podcasts, from students, from the publisher, seem to be very validating that there's a need for this, that students want some guidance on this, and that the future marketers and PR people and advertisers, this is definitely something they can study so they can go in their first professional jobs and have a competency here, understand how it works, understand what brands are trying to accomplish, understand, a brand deal, creator brief, and an agreement, and, in thinking strategically about how to roll out a campaign. So I'm just I used a textbook in a class called Digital PR. But the hope is that eventually it would be the textbook for an entire course about the creator economy. That's my plan.
Right. And I also got, deadline of reading the book before this, recording. And I did go through it, and yeah, it's very insightful. And really grateful that you have written this book, because I'm pretty sure it's going to be really useful for your students as well as people across the world. So we'll put the link of the book in the description of this video.
Thank you so much.
Very basic question. How do you teach, creator economy at your university? Because a lot of people think that either you are, God gifted, you're talented, you can appear in front of camera. It's a natural talent. You either have it or you don't.
Yeah.
So how do you teach them? What do you teach them from acting, voice modulation, editing? I mean, there is so much here. So where do you start?
Yeah, and I don't go to into any of those specifics, but we do have other courses that are they're
Okay.
addressing things like video editing and public speaking and all that. But the things I'm trying most to root it in is strategic thinking. That you could, with some work, probably find a good niche for you to enter if you really wanted to be a content creator. That there's probably still some subject that's been unexplored, or maybe there's just a perspective that's missing, or a certain tone that's missing to the content that's already out there. So that's where it's really starting with doing. Really, if you really want to do this, do some homework and find a lane that could potentially help you find an audience. That's, if you're too general, that it's going to be really tricky. So there's that sort of thing. Strategic planning, doing the research, finding data that's out there about, just, it could be as simple as Google Trends and looking at some
Yeah.
different topics and seeing how the popularity of those searches may have be going up or maybe going down or maybe stagnant. But you could start to get a pretty good sense of what people want online, through using that sort of information. Definitely focused on ethics, which is always a big push in a lot of our classes here. Talking about the requirement, the Federal Trade Commission's requirements for disclosure when you have been paid by a brand or even just received something for free, and
Right.
really making the students aware of that. Measurement, calling a lot of attention to the metrics that matter, the way brands try to evaluate the ROI of working with a content creator. That's a big one. And then gathering up case studies. And there's more out there than what people would realize. And I'm a big fan of the Webby Awards and the Shorty Awards and the case studies we can find on all the winners that give you a great deal of information about what that brand was trying to accomplish with that collaboration. What were the final numbers, final metrics associated with that? I'm a member of the Public Relations Society of America, and one of the biggest perks for membership is access to their case studies for their annual Silver Anvil Awards. And that's not public information, but you are getting access to some insider information sometimes about what an organization's motivations were, what their initial objectives were, did they reach each of those objectives? And we can sit down as a class, look at these case studies and talk about what worked, what would you do differently? So I'm finding there's a multitude of things that will work well in a college classroom, that we can make an academic foundation for learning about this, studying it,
Right.
potentially planning your own content venture, or getting ready to take a growing number of roles in businesses and agencies that are focused on dealing with creators.
Right. And I'm really glad that you mentioned the word niche, because in the third chapter of your book, you talk about, and this is your words, riches are in the niches.
Yeah, and I didn't
So,
coin that phrase, but I really liked it.
okay. So in this AI world, what niches do you see as sustainable and lucrative? Because you see a lot of disruption taking place nowadays. A lot of
Yeah.
tools are coming out. Everyone is confused. So what your advice would be?
I think there's just any niche that has a mass of people that are really passionate about it, interested, and a niche, I guess, that has some products associated with it. Some things that are very specific to that community, whether that's in a outdoors capacity, or just a particular niche sport that has its
Yeah.
own unique equipment and sportswear that is used by the people that are really into that. So I think it's very easy to get discouraged, right, and say everybody has a podcast, or every niche every topic has been explored. But that's one of the things I really try to through the book, it would be really encourage a student to really be intentional and think about that, and what is it that has been unexplored? What are the topics that get you really excited?
Yeah.
I think these, the best niche would be one that the people who are really into it feel like it's maybe been underserved, right? Because then they're really going to be excited that you are coming with something that feels tailored, to them. So I think, and you can't fake it either, right? You have to really be, into that niche. Your enthusiasm has to be legit. Your commitment to trying to be a lifelong learner and related to that niche has
Yeah.
to be there. But I think, there's so many, there's evergreen things, obviously, like food that you could really just keep drilling down to, right? I used the example in my class about, if a student wanted to launch a food focused Instagram, what would be a good steps for them to follow, right? And if it's just food, it's going to be really tough to make an impact, right? But maybe you can focus on meals that are meals on a budget for college students. Okay. And then boom, you start making
Yeah.
something that's a little more niche. You may not blow up from that, but you're probably going to get some very encouraging responses from people who welcome that content. But maybe you even go a step further and you start going, all right, these are recipes for on a budget for college students who don't eat gluten or something like that. Or, going even further, like meals that are gluten free that you can make that are cheap. And it's all from products you bought at Trader Joe's or some other grocery store, that just to try to demonstrate how you can keep niching down and maybe get to that one niche that has been underserved and people are just going to, hands up celebrating that you finally, found them and are creating something that they're really, really excited about.
Do you teach them how to go viral?
Yeah, that is the thing I definitely try not to do or make any promises about. Yes, because I think that's a slippery slope. I try to, in the way I describe the book, the way we talk about the summer camp, in big bold letters, try to say, this is not about teaching you how to be internet famous or even how to teach you how to be an influencer. We really don't go right to that either, because there are content creators who are may not have any brand deals. And they're maybe just doing it for the pure creative fulfillment, or they're been able to monetize just through, selling subscriptions. So, teaching you how to go viral, break the internet, that is stuff that we will analyze things that have happened like that and try to pick apart what led to that virality. But making no promises to anyone about how to get there themselves.
Do you have a hard time, decoupling this? Because a lot of people think everyone wants to become famous, not, let's say for the same reasons. And there is a, correlation, of course, between creating content and being known for it. So
Sure.
do you have a hard time decoupling that?
Yeah, I think that's something I think about a lot, and just, I think looking at our university, before talking about creators, we had broadcast journalism classes, we had theater programs, acting programs, and those are programs that do attract students who, for the love of creativity and journalism and all that. But there is a component to that, right? About being a public figure and potentially, fame and adulation that comes with that. So I really, try to, I guess, really in the textbook, talk about times where that's maybe gone bad for people, and how that may not be always cracked up to be. If I have a content creator as a guest speaker, just asking them, how do you deal with negativity, with haters in the comment section? How did you develop a thick skin? Really just trying to paint a very clear picture of the ups and downs of this type of work, and that fame could certainly have its drawbacks. There's a lot of pluses too, as far as the brands that will approach you about wanting to work with you and draw off that fame and draw off the connection you have with your audience. But for somebody that's ill prepared for that, there's a lot of things that can go wrong, and unfortunately or fortunately, there's always examples that I could take for the real world about these situations and talk to my students in class, and we could try to learn from it.
Right. Speaking of ups and downs, AI is transforming creative industries. ChatGPT has sped up the creative output, if you want to call it creative. How do you see AI impacting the creator economy at large and at the human or the individual level, upcoming creators?
Yeah, the things that I find most interesting, is my personal experience with podcasting and how much I hated editing is, how like a tool like Descript could help with that, could go in and automatically remove the uhs and ums, and I find that the prospect of those sorts of things pretty enticing. Now, I have not used them, but I've heard mixed reviews of how some of these AI editing tools, or the AI clipping tool to take long form video and podcasts and make compelling short form clips. But I think that's really interesting, because I do hear from people who love the editing process, but I think in general most people that is probably the part they just loathe about being creative, right? So I think that's kind of fun. The prospects that could have, that could maybe that keeps somebody sticking with their content venture, through the slow growth, because they feel like they're at least focused, spending enough time on the stuff they really like. I think that's really interesting. The using AI for ideation, I think is fascinating, to come up with, 50 something blog post ideas that you could explore. I asked, ChatGPT to write a creator brief, or an agreement between a brand and a creator, that was very impressive in what all it pulled together. So it can certainly influence multiple aspects. What I don't have a lot of, what I don't think I have, I think is really, I don't know, there yet, are going to take off for these creations that are just so AI driven. And that could be, some of these, I've seen some video tools that, will, from based off of written script, will then give you an AI host and have them read and then add B-roll in the background. And those things are just still too robotic, still
you can
too
see that,
off-putting, that I don't see them taking off yet. But I do see AI, playing a big role in helping the process along, smoothing the workflow a little bit. Lots of talk the last few weeks, right, about AI generated thumbnail tools and how much that's improving, and being able to generate a thumbnail even from like a rough sketch on a piece of paper. I think that stuff's really neat. Now we'll see what happens when maybe if too many creators start using those thumbnail tools and there's a sea of sameness, out on YouTube. But I think that's also something I think would be really exciting for a creator who, where some of this stuff is kind of the afterthought, right? You're writing that post, you're pouring in a lot of energy to writing something, and writing an SEO optimized headline is kind of the last thing you're thinking about. So you could ask AI, or you produce that, you wrote out a script for a great video, you edit it, it's ready to go. Oh dang! But now you got to make a thumbnail. You can see if AI can just do that. So I think that part's interesting, to me, how that may, keep some may get some creators to start, and maybe some of those creators who have started but are frustrated with the process, maybe they'll keep going a little farther because AI can smooth out some of the rougher tasks of being a creator.
Exactly. We have seen, instances where past content from, creators, it can resurface and create, a lot of chaos. It can be a meltdown like Kanye West, he had on Twitter, causing reputational risk for brands as well. So we literally saw, I think Adidas pulling up every shoe that they sold with him. Adidas or Nike, I'm sorry, I'm forgetting. So how should companies, strike a balance between trust and due diligence? How do you teach that to young and upcoming creators?
Yeah, I mean, and that's very, very aligned with what a PR professor teaches, right? That you would really, and I see it as a challenge, I think, for a lot of brands, because they may, in an effort to be fast and hop on a viral trend, sometimes may find themselves maybe entering a trend that they don't fully understand, that has a deeper context to it, or something like that. Yeah. Or they're embracing maybe an individual that created some content related to that brand, and that when you do a little digging, there's some things about that person maybe you're not too fond of. So I think the brands still need to even if it means maybe erring on the side of playing it safe more, need to remember the good sound PR principles and avoiding a crisis situation. And it's not easy, right? Because a lot of these creators are anonymous, or they have stage names, or whatever however you want to refer to it. And you probably have to dig a little bit more to see who they actually are. But I would definitely maintain that is time well spent if you were going to invest in a partnership with a content creator to really make sure that you're going back and going into different channels to to research them, whether that's, a public records search, to make sure there's not a criminal history, or at least going, a few years back on their content, to make sure there's not anything that gives your brand pause.
Right.
But as far as the creator trust thing, I think that's always a challenge too, because, these sort of collaborations are successful, right? When a brand lets a creator be themselves a little bit, lets them, it was pretty revolutionary when we started hearing host read ads on podcasts, right? That a brand would be willing to advocate that much control over that message, but they knew it was a risk worth taking because that audience would connect so much better with hearing it from their favorite creator. So that's going to be the challenge, to produce a brief, an agreement, to lay out some things, to create some clear talking points that you want that creator to get out in their piece of content, but to not overly, script out what you want from them. And there's probably going to be some hiccups in that process, but that's what brands are, I think, really that's their challenge, to really figure that step out.
Right. To any brand manager who must be listening to this right now, because in our audience, there are mostly influencer marketing professionals looking to work with creators. If they want to work with the creators on your campus, what would your let's say offer to them? What is going to be the strength of your creators, and what they can do with brands, or what type of brands they can collaborate with?
Yeah, I see some very interesting things happening on campus. There's always been, or for a long time have been, campus street teams, even pre content creators, right? Where brands saw some benefit in just, I don't know, sending a box of flyers, to some connected students that are to promote an upcoming music release or something like that, or a movie. So there's, and especially at a campus like Penn State, we have more than 40,000 students. That's very attractive, for a brand. And then if you get connected with those students who are the social butterflies of campus and are influencing people in other ways, separate of social media, if you can provide them some swag and help them organize a giveaway. I know a student who's an ambassador for Poppy, the functional soda brand. Yeah. And she's, it's funny hearing students talk about, their small apartments that are full of swag from brands.
Wow.
And she's regularly tasked with producing events on campus or sponsoring something and bringing soda to it. So I think that's these brands in the consumer packaged goods. There's a lot that are trying to reach college audiences. It's definitely worth looking at the campus creators, but I would also give them some guidance too, give some clear direction about the events you would like them to hold. Give them a little bit more direction in what their content should look like and how the brand should be mentioned and how a can should be held, or the things they can't say and the things they can say. I think, you would probably want to take that extra step and be a little bit more of a teacher when working with a campus creator. But yeah, the students who are creating content on campus, they're in a unique spot because they have access to so many people. So doing, person on the street type of content is very easy. It's just a step outside of your dorm room or, at the main street downtown. There's so many events happening constantly. There are student orgs, that can organize around so many different topics. And we actually have a campus chapter of an organization called Reach that was originally started at USC and is an organization for student content creators and students who just really like social media. So I see brands also working through them too. If you show up at one of their meetings, it's probably likely you're going to get to take home something because they received a box of some product. I was just at a recent meeting of theirs, and they one of the co-directors or co-student presidents of the organization brought a box of sunscreen that was sent to her. So brands are aware of this. I think sometimes it's maybe wasted, if you just give them that box of free stuff without some direction. But I think there's a lot of prospects, a very attractive environment, for a brand to enter. We've seen the dating app Bumble has a pretty big presence on campus regularly
Oh,
with
okay.
swag and giveaways and going around football tailgate scenes to promote their product. So I'm seeing evidence of brands big and small trying to tap into campus content creators.
Right. And speaking of these content creators, how does one become a campus content creator? What are the top three skills a student needs to become a thriving or ethical creator, as you put it?
So I like that, thinking about thriving and ethics, right? I see that as a student who's happy being a creator and somebody who is not going to derail their life or career through content creating.
Yep.
And I think it really needs to start off with respect for your audience and respect to anybody who you are who's helping you with making that content. And that is, I cringe sometimes seeing, some of the person on the street content, because I feel like maybe people in the public aren't respected enough, or, they're maybe talking to people who aren't as savvy to understand where that video could go. So I think respecting people's property, privacy, and also respecting people as consumers, right? When it comes time, if you're actually in a position to get a brand deal, and maybe that is saying no to a product that you tried and just don't like and think it's inferior, or maybe that's, not taking an agreement from a brand that wants you to make unsubstantiated claims about how well that supplement works, or that protein, or things that protein powder can accomplish. So I think that's something, students need to really think about, because your judgment can be clouded, right? When money's involved. It's like, wait, you're going to give me all this free stuff and pay me to just make a post about it? I'm in. But taking those things, thinking about those thoughtfully, and also, they just ethically, making sure you're disclosing that you've been paid using hashtag ad, just understanding that you, as a consumer, you would want to have all that information, right? If somebody was making a recommendation, so you can make your own determination whether that suggestion is coming from the heart or it's because they've been paid. So I think, that's a big deal. I think there's also a real benefit to finding a community, to other people you can ask for support or advice if you're going to be a creator. I think that's so important. And also just keeping in mind the big picture, that this can be a fun little thing you're doing right now, but you would never want to derail a relationship or hurt your reputation long term because of something you did with your content creation, right? And even with a brand, understanding that if you do this really well and you're accountable and it's easy, and them dealing with you is just an absolute joy, you may get repeat business, from that. They may have a long-term connection. So I think, not approaching this, not being impulsive, thinking of it thoughtfully, making sure that it just continues to set you up for success in the future. Those are the things I really encourage, student content creators to think about.
I'm glad that you mentioned future, because I was just about to ask you, how can they be future ready? Where there is so much uncertainty, so much, we just saw the Ghibli, exploding on Twitter.
Sure.
Everyone's doing it. So it's essentially, an IP gone public, right? Right. Everyone's creating the artwork. So there is the security aspect, right, of the content, of, your social security number based on your, appearance online, misuse of these kinds of information. So in this AI world, in this utopia or dystopia, whatever you want to call it, how would you advise creators to be ready for the future?
Yeah, I think, for students, I'm always trying to really encourage just a curiosity, right? An understanding that if you are going to enter the world of communications, if you want to be a content creator, if you want to work in PR, you want to work in advertising, you are under that extra burden to be staying on top of what's happening all the time, and are going to need to be curious, not be set in your ways, be willing to try new things. I often describe it as like a blessing and a burden for doing this type of work. It's a blessing in that things are always changing and it's always going to be exciting. It's a burden in that you need to really step up and be paying attention. And I recommend trying to have a very intentional content diet. have that stuff that you watch for pure entertainment, but have a podcast that you listen to a few times a week that is helping you understand the world of business or the world of technology, or have a YouTube series or email newsletter that you subscribe to that's helping you stay on top of these things, and just make it like a practice, something that is just reflexive every day that you're going to do. I think that's the big thing, is just to keep your mind sharp and keep trying these new things. When a new social media platform comes along, sign up for it. Have it on your phone. I do that. I'm guilty of doing that and then just like letting it collect dust on my phone for several years. But yeah, just being willing to jump into some of these things. Try your hand at AI art generation for a day and see see how you can take something from your imagination or a dream you had and actually create a visual for it. I think it's just, it just really comes down to enthusiasm, excitement, and just making it part of your job to keep sharp, keep trying new things, and trying to probably one of the toughest things, identify opportunities, as they come your way, and I think that's going to be the really hard thing, right? Is we're going to be, I worked in newspapers at a very bad time where, ad revenue was declining significantly, and moved on from that industry. So I think we're going to have to also just keep looking for evidence, maybe that a previous skill of ours may not be as valuable as it once was, and think about, what is this other thing? What's this conference I can go to, or this training that I can take the initiative and receive that will help me maybe prepare for what's coming next.
Right. And I love that you use the word curiosity, because I recently read, in one of a rather philosophical post about, these AI tools, that curiosity is the final frontier for AI.
Yeah.
It's going to be the last thing that it needs to learn. So that's a rather poetic, way to look at it.
No, I love that. I think it's energizing. It's fuel, and if you're on a college campus too, it's kind of everywhere. There's so many avenues where you can kind of take your curiosity.
Yeah, and this answer was actually given by Perplexity.
Really?
When somebody asked Perplexity, what's going to be the final frontier of AI? It said curiosity.
Yeah, that's what it identified. Wow.
Yeah, and I think the CEO of Perplexity, Arvind Srinivas, he shared that also. I was like, I love that.
Yeah. Making note of that.
Yeah, definitely. Where do you see influencer marketing in the next 5 years?
I think I'm interested sometimes in maybe some of the less glamorous sides of this. I think, a lot of what we see maybe in commercials and the reports that we read from TikTok and Adobe and Patreon, they put out, there's a lot of great reports out there with data on the creator economy, and I'm constantly reading them. But a lot of the creators, there's a type, right? They're often young, they're incredibly hip, they're metropolitan.
Yep.
I think it's big. The creator economy is bigger than that, and I think in the future we're going to see more of a spotlight, whether that's just somebody who's a very regional, content creator who's, it's like the old school days of Foursquare when you could be the mayor of your town, because you checked in at so many different spots. I think we'll see some people who really become, men or women about town with their content, and people who are making restaurant recommendations and are trying, going to outdoor destinations and making content related to it, and I think we'll see more. We're going to see more and more brands or more small businesses realize that creators could work for them too. That this isn't just an area where if you're not working with a creator with 1 million followers, that you don't have any business to be in it. No, you could be a small business owner. You could pay a few $100s to that local content creator with a following of 10,000 and probably see a really good investment on that if they truly have the trust of their audience. So I think that's going to be really interesting to me. I'm really interested in the concept of a creator middle class and some of the factors that could potentially lead to that, where we could see people making, what would be considered a decent living in their community by making content. I think that's really interesting, and I think there's reason to believe that there, with a few tweaks maybe to how some of these platforms operate and how payouts are distributed, that maybe that could happen. That's probably some pie in the sky thinking there, but I'm just interested in how this creator economy could take different shapes and could just include a bigger multitude of people.
Yeah, and I love this phrase, creator middle class. I think we're going to see more people there, thanks to teachers and people like you, who are actually teaching them ethical ways of becoming a creator and not an influencer necessarily.
Yeah.
Professor Zimmerman, would you also like to make a bold prediction about influencer
Ooh,
marketing or
bold prediction.
creators?
Yeah, that is not something a professor, or at least a professor in my like me, tries to do much of. But I think it's just this is going to keep going in interesting directions. I'm curious about what content could lead to different changes that we start to see in the world around us. Maybe that's a renewed interest here in America in the trades. Yep. Because some of the content is really fun to watch, seeing people build stuff, right? And is it possible that maybe some of this content will awaken new interests in maybe industries that had a hard time, recruiting people or getting young people excited about going into them? I think that's an aspect that's interesting. I'll make the very self-serving prediction that we'll see more colleges and universities teach the creator economy. I think that's a pretty safe bet. But thinking some really bold thinking, I think I'm gonna have to keep thinking that one over. I tend to be a little bit more measured professor.
Professor Zimmerman, couple of rituals that we make our guests go through. You have to give us a book recommendation, your favorite book of all time, or whatever you're reading nowadays. And please nominate someone for our show.
Oh, please nominate someone. All right. So I think something I'm reading right now that I indulge, a lot of the content that I enjoy is focused on nostalgia, 80s, 90s nostalgia. Okay. And I'm reading a big coffee table book right now from these two gentlemen that had a business. They were called Costico Brothers, and they made posters of the biggest athletes of the 80s and 90s. And they were often they made very cinematic type of presentations. There'd be smoke, there'd be costumes. And these were kind of staples when I grew up on kids' walls. And a few years ago, they pulled together just a beautiful coffee table book of all their most popular posters with really interesting reflections on like what it took to pull these together. Sometimes the kind of guerrilla tactics they were using to be able to shoot somewhere, and the way they recruited people to be like background players, and what players were like really game for what they pitched, and which ones were maybe a little standoffish. So I'm just I really in my 40s extra nostalgic, and there is just so much stuff to indulge that right now from online content and now to books to retro focused products in the store. I'm in kind of a golden age, I guess, for my generation of being able to see a lot of nostalgia out there.
Wonderful. And would you like to nominate someone like you for our show?
I don't know if you've ever spoken to Leah Haberman, who has a newsletter called In Case You Missed It, and she is also teaches, I believe, she's an adjunct, I believe, at UCLA, teaching this sort of thing, and just somebody who has been really helpful, looking at her newsletter. I've been lucky enough to meet her. She's trying to get a good sense of what schools and universities are doing this sort of work. So and just somebody who I really admire, and how much information they're able to pull about the creator economy, and how they're always able to, how she's always able to come up with some sort of really helpful analysis of what's happening. I'm like jealous sometimes that my mind doesn't work that way, and I can't always, process things and come up with a really interesting take as something's unfolding in the news. So yeah, Leah's great, and been really helpful for me in gathering information and getting to know more of the players who could help me as I'm trying to formalize education around this.
Wonderful. Professor Bill Zimmerman, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being a guiding light in this rapidly confusing AI-ridden times of creator economy. I would highly recommend your book to our listeners or viewers right now. So wherever you're watching or listening to this, whether on YouTube or Spotify, where these two platforms we are on, you will find the link to Professor Zimmerman's profile as well as his book. Please pick it up and get started on creating content. We're all, rooting for creator economy and the creators. So thank you so much, Bill Zimmerman, Professor Zimmerman, again. If there's anything else you wanted to say and I didn't ask you, now's the time. Please also tell us the name of the book again.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed this talk, and I am all ears for people in the industry who have thoughts on what needs to be included in these courses. I really tried to create this textbook with a heavy practical emphasis, lots of case studies. Every chapter has a Q&A with an active content creator. Some of them with upward big, six-figure followings, and others who are more niche. But I'm always trying to get the perspective of the people doing this every day, and also, yes, the people from industry, because I'm training the next interns and junior employees for them, and want to make sure that I'm doing the right things and preparing them in the right ways. So if you have ideas going forward, or any of the listeners want to reach out to me, I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn or on my university profile.
Wonderful. Thanks again, Professor Zimmerman. We hope to see you again on another season of this podcast with another book.
I love that. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Shubham.
Impulse, the influencer marketing podcast, is brought to you by Phyllo. Phyllo is the easiest way to get access to authenticated creator data from hundreds of different platforms. To know more about Phyllo, visit getphyllo.com. That's get, PHYLLO.com. Also, make sure to search for Influencer Marketing Podcast in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube Podcasts. And don't forget to click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Phyllo, thank you so much for listening.